Using both the original Chinese text and Lionel Giles' classic 1910 English translation, we'll explore the art of war chapter by chapter, not just what Sun Tzu wrote, but what he meant. Welcome to The Way and the War. In the previous episode, we examined the 5 fundamental factors. The 7 strategic comparisons are a continuation of those 5 factors. Rather than introducing entirely new principles, Sun Tzu now uses them as a framework for comparing the 2 opposing sides before a war begins. The comparisons are: which side possesses the stronger Tao? Which commander is more capable? Which side enjoys the advantage of heaven and earth? Which army has the better method and discipline? Which side possesses greater overall military strength? Which army is better trained? Which side maintains a clearer and more consistent system of rewards and punishments? Sun Tzu asks these questions because strategy begins with comparison. Only by honestly comparing your own strengths and weaknesses with those of your opponent can you make a rational decision about whether a war should be fought at all. Sun Tzu then writes, "The general that hearkens to my counsel and acts upon it will conquer. Let such a one be retained in command. The general that hearkens not to my counsel nor acts upon it will suffer defeat. Let such a one be dismissed." At first glance, this may sound surprisingly confident, even arrogant. Sun Tzu is essentially saying, if a commander understands and follows these principles, victory becomes far more likely. If he ignores them, defeat becomes far more likely. This confidence is important. It tells us that Sun Tzu regarded his military theory not as a collection of personal opinions, but as principles that had been tested through repeated experience in war. So, after accepting Sun Tzu's advice, what comes next? Sun Tzu writes, 机理以听，乃谓之事，宜作其外。是者，因利而知全也。 Lionel Giles translated this passage as, while heading the profit of my counsel, avail yourself also of any helpful circumstances, over and beyond the ordinary rules. According as circumstances are favorable, one should modify one's plans. The next step, Sun Tzu tells us, is to create a position of advantage. Lionel Giles expresses this as, avail yourself of any helpful circumstances. At the heart of this sentence lies one of the most important concepts in the entire The Art of War. Shu. Lionel Giles translated Shi as circumstances. As we saw earlier with Tao, this translation captures the meaning of the passage within its immediate context, but it does not fully capture everything that Shi means throughout The Art of War. In fact, an entire later chapter is devoted to this single concept. For more than 2,000 years, scholars have debated exactly how Shi should be understood. We'll explore those different interpretations when we reach that chapter. For now, however, circumstances is an appropriate translation within the context of this passage. This is also the first time Sun Tzu explains what he means by Shi. He writes, shi zhe, yin li ji quan ye. Lionel Giles translated it as, according as circumstances are favorable, one should modify one's plans. Overall, I believe Lionel Giles translated only part of what Sun Tzu intended here. The original Chinese text expresses a broader idea. Sun Tzu is saying that shi is created by recognizing the conditions that favor your own side, continuously adjusting your plans, and taking flexible actions in order to gain and maintain strategic initiative. In other words, shi is not simply a favorable circumstance. It is a favorable strategic position, and the purpose of creating that position is to obtain and preserve the initiative. It leads to an important question. If shi is a favorable strategic position, then how do we create it? At first glance, Sun Tzu never seems to answer this question directly. But if we read the context carefully, the answer has been there all along. The foundation of Shi lies in the 5 fundamental factors and the 7 strategic comparisons. They are not merely tools for evaluating a war. They are also the source from which Shi is created. Through these comparisons, we identify where our advantages and disadvantages truly lie. If the overall balance is overwhelmingly unfavorable, then according to Sun Tzu, the war should not be fought. But wherever genuine advantages exist, they should be fully exploited to build a favorable strategic position. Does that mean we should simply abandon every area in which we are at a disadvantage? Not entirely. One important idea runs throughout the art of war. Conditions are never static. They are constantly changing. The 5 fundamental factors and the 7 strategic comparisons are not fixed. They evolve over time. A capable commander therefore does not evaluate only the present. He also considers how those conditions may change in the future, and how he can influence those changes. The objective is not merely to recognize favorable conditions. It is to transform unfavorable conditions into favorable ones whenever possible. In other words, Shi is not something you discover. It is something you create. And once it has been created, it becomes the foundation of strategic initiative. Besides creating Shi through the 5 fundamental factors and the 7 strategic comparisons, Sun Tzu introduces another famous idea that can also help create strategic initiative. He writes, Bing Jie, Guidao Ye. Lionel Giles translated this sentence as, all warfare is based on deception. For more than a century, this has been the translation through which most English-speaking readers have understood Sun Tzu's words. The key to this sentence lies in a single Chinese character, Gui. Lionel Giles translated Gui as deception. This choice is understandable. The character Gui carries a wide range of meanings in Chinese. Depending on the context, it can refer to enjoining, deception, unusual behavior, contradiction, unpredictability, or acting in ways that are out of the ordinary. Among these possibilities, deception certainly fits the immediate context of this passage. This is most likely why Lionel Giles chose that translation. However, there is another interpretation that may come closer to what Sun Tzu intended. In some classical Chinese texts, Gui can also carry the idea of concealment. If we continue reading the very next sentences, Sun Tzu writes, hence, when able to attack, we must seem unable. When using our forces, we must seem inactive. When we are near, we must make the enemy believe we are far away. When far away, we must make him believe we are near. Notice that every example Sun Tzu gives follows the same pattern. He is not describing deception for its own sake. He is describing the concealment of one's true capabilities and true intentions. From this perspective, the sentence may be understood in a slightly different way. Rather than saying that warfare is fundamentally based on deception itself, Sun Tzu is emphasizing that the fundamental principle of warfare is to conceal your true strength and your true intentions. Deception is one method of achieving that concealment, but it is not the objective. The following passage from "Hold out baits to entice the enemy" to "If his forces are united, separate them" is not a separate collection of military tricks. It is Sun Tzu's practical explanation of how Gui should be applied. Every example serves the same purpose: to influence the enemy's decisions by preventing them from seeing reality as it truly is. Whether by concealing your own intentions, disguising your strength, creating false expectations, or exploiting your opponent's emotional state, the objective remains the same: to shape the battlefield before the decisive battle ever begins. In other words, Gui is not the objective. It is a method, and its ultimate purpose is to create and preserve strategic initiative. If we now look back at the previous discussion of Shi, a clear pattern begins to emerge. Sun Tzu first explains how favorable conditions can be transformed into Shi, favorable strategic position. He then explains how GUI can also be used to create or strengthen that favorable position. Although these ideas are introduced separately, they are working toward the same objective. Both are methods of obtaining strategic initiative. This is one of the central themes running throughout the art of war. Again and again, Sun Tzu emphasizes the importance of acting from a position of initiative rather than reacting to the enemy. Strategic initiative is not simply an advantage. It allows you to shape the situation itself. Once a commander truly understands the principle of GUI and is able to apply it effectively, another famous idea naturally follows. Sun Tzu writes, "Attack where he is unprepared. Appear where you are not expected." These words are often quoted on their own, but they are not independent principles. They are the natural result of everything that comes before. To attack where the enemy is unprepared, you must first conceal your true intentions. To appear where you are not expected, you must first prevent the enemy from correctly understanding your movements. In other words, surprise is not the strategy itself. It is the result of a successful strategy. That is why Sun Tzu repeatedly stresses another principle. These military devices must not be divulged beforehand. Without secrecy, neither GUI, nor surprise, nor strategic initiative can be sustained. Now let's look back at the entire passage. From "all warfare is based on GUI" to "these military devices must not be divulged beforehand." One striking pattern immediately stands out. Throughout this entire passage, Sun Tzu never encourages commanders to seek victory through direct confrontation alone. Instead, he repeatedly advocates achieving one's objective through indirect means. Rather than relying on brute force, he emphasizes shaping the situation before the decisive engagement ever takes place. This idea bears a remarkable resemblance to what the British military theorist B.H. Liddell Hart would later call the indirect approach. Liddell Hart argued that the most effective strategy is often not to attack an opponent's greatest strength directly, but to unbalance the opponent, both physically and psychologically, through indirect action, thereby achieving victory at the lowest possible cost. Although Sun Tzu and Liddell Hart lived more than 2,000 years apart and developed their theories independently, both recognized the same strategic principle. The highest form of strategy is not to win by destroying the enemy through costly confrontation. It is to achieve your objective while avoiding unnecessary conflict whenever possible. This way of thinking runs throughout the art of war. Again and again, Sun Tzu encourages commanders to avoid decisive battles whenever they can, to achieve victory with the fewest battles, with the smallest losses, and at the lowest possible cost. This is why some of the most famous passages in the art of war, such as "Supreme excellence consists in breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting," and "The worst policy of all is to besiege walled cities," are all expressions of the same underlying philosophy. Now that we have completed the first chapter, let's briefly look back at the overall structure of laying plans. Sun Tzu begins by warning rulers never to enter a war lightly. If war becomes unavoidable, the first step is tempo calculations. Those calculations begin with the 5 fundamental factors and the 7 strategic comparisons. Through this process, a commander identifies the strengths and weaknesses of both sides. From there, favorable conditions are transformed into creating strategic initiative. GUI then becomes another method of creating, strengthening, and preserving that initiative. Finally, Sun Tzu introduces a way of thinking that will continue throughout the rest of the book. Whenever possible, achieve your objective through the indirect approach rather than costly direct confrontation. When viewed as a whole, the first chapter is not simply an introduction. It establishes the strategic framework upon which the rest of the art of war is built. In the next episode, we'll step away from the original text for a moment. Instead, we'll explore how the ideas presented in laying plans can be applied beyond the battlefield, to business, leadership, career development, and other areas of modern life. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.